Hey everyone, I'm Aideen T. Finnola. I'm a Martha Beck trained life coach, a public speaker, and I'm an author of my memoir called My Exquisite Purple Life, Insights from a Woman Who Never Should Have Made It, But Did. Thank you for joining me for this segment of my video blog. And today I want to talk to you about creating a sacred practice. I want to talk about what a sacred practice is, why it's important, and how you can create a sacred practice for yourself. So, I came out of a religious cult. I was raised in a religious cult in my childhood. And when I left that cult, in the cult, there was this really rigid, strict set of rules and practices and way of living that eventually, once I became an adult, did not work for me anymore. And when I left that, I really was kind of lost for quite a long time. And I really felt quite a void. And so I had to work hard to recreate a practice for myself, one that would work for me. And I now work with clients who are also coming out of situations like that, whether it is also a cult that they're coming out of or just an involvement in an extreme religious group, a very conservative fundamentalist church or something like that. So, and when I first started trying to quantify for my clients and my audiences what I had created for myself, I didn't want to call it a religious practice because I knew that if you're coming out of an extreme religious experience like that, that can be a very triggering word. And most people would say, I'm not religious and that's not for me. I also didn't want to call it a spiritual practice because for people who still are practicing inside of a traditional religion, then they would say, well, that's not for me either. And so I kind of, my mind just kind of tumbled around like, what can I call this? What can I call this? And the word that popped into my head was the word sacred. And so I ran to the dictionary, well, online. Who owns a dictionary anymore? But anyway, I went to dictionary.com and I looked up the word sacred, and I found that amongst the things that we think of traditionally, like churches and mosques and temples and burial grounds are sacred. In its broadest definition, the word sacred means to secure against violation. And when I read that, I thought that is the right word for what I created for myself and for what I like, or for what I teach my clients and what I teach my audiences. And so a sacred practice is it's a practice that secures you against violation. I also have two more specific, yet they're still very general, descriptions for a sacred practice. One is that it reminds you that you are greater than the sum of your parts, because there is a part of us that is above and beyond and outside of our experience, our physical experience in time and space. And the second criteria for a sacred practice is that it reminds you that we are all one. And it helps you to get beyond the illusion of division and separateness that we really experience in time and space and that we really suffer from. So a sacred practice is one that secures you against violation. It reminds you that you are greater than the sum of your parts. And it also reminds you that we are all one. So why is a sacred practice important? Because we as humans have a dimension to us that is outside of time and space. Whatever your vocabulary is for that, you might call it your spirit, your soul, your authentic self, your non-local self, whatever the vocabulary it is that you use, there is that dynamic to us. And it's very, very important that we nurture that dynamic. So how do you create a sacred practice? Well, if you keep in mind that broad definition of to secure yourself against violation, and keeping in mind that it is something that reminds you that you are greater than the sum of your parts and reminds you that we are all one, pretty much anything can become a sacred practice. So being that I have never returned to a traditional religious practice in any of the five biggies, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and what's the other one I'm trying to remember? Islam. Sorry about that. I always talk about the five biggies and I always forget one or more of them. So anyway, I've never returned to one of those more traditional practices. If you have, and that is a part of your practice, those religions offer such a wealth of traditions and ritual and ceremony that can all become a part of your spiritual or your sacred practice as long as they secure you against violation, right? If, like me, you do not practice inside any of the five biggies, and that doesn't work for you anymore, really anything can become a part of your sacred practice. So for me, my cup of coffee in the morning, I snuggle up in my favorite chair and I light a candle and I sit there and I just nurture myself and I remind myself that I am greater than the sum of my parts. And I think about my connection to the world. When I go out for my morning run, I run on a golf course that's behind my house. And there's these beautiful trails that go through trees, and I get to see birds and bunnies, and I go over bridges with streams and all the rest of that. It's a real Cinderella sort of thing. I start singing with the birds, and no, I don't. Anyway, that is a part of my sacred practice because as I am running, I am remembering and I'm connecting to the entirety of this experience and the part of everything that's outside of time and space, right? Because all of nature, all of everything has a vibration. And so that's a part of my sacred practice. You know, when I call up a good friend and I have a really wonderful, nurturing conversation with a friend, that reminds me that we are all one. And so that's a part of my sacred practice. So really, when you are thinking about creating your sacred practice, when you look at what is it that secures you against violation, what is it that will remind you that you are greater than the sum of your parts? What is it that will help you to remember that we're all one? And then the sky is the limit, and you can then the beauty of it is you can literally fill your day with so many moments of your sacred practice to keep that connection for yourself throughout the day. So if this has resonated with you, I encourage you to go over to my website because I have created a digital program called Reclaiming Your Mind, One Practical Step at a Time. And I talk about a sacred practice in that program, and I also expand. It's about a 2-hour program. It has 3 segments. There's a downloadable workbook that comes with it. And I talk about, it's an introduction. It's a really simple introduction to several different kinds of meditation, the practice of mindfulness, looking at a sacred practice. Also, I go much more in depth about that. I talk about how to handle your inner critic and also how to look at the story that you might be telling yourself about your life and does that serve you, and how you can rewrite your story to really reclaim your life. Because that's the work that I do. That's the work that I do with my clients. That's the work that I've done in my own life for so many decades. I've pulled myself out of just such a shithole. If you want to hear about more of that, go ahead and read my book. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this segment of my vlog. I am so excited for you to investigate creating a sacred practice for yourself. And I would love it if you would pop in the comments, share with me, what do you do for your sacred practice? And if this has resonated with you, please share this video. Please give it a thumbs up. Please share it, because the human experience is so collaborative and we just all thrive when we share more with each other and we contribute to each other. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Love you. Bye.